I found out my girlfriend was cheating on me with my brother and exposed them at my wedding, but the drama was far from over. I'm a 45-year-old man, and never in my life did I imagine I'd be sharing this story. Yet here I am, compelled to write it down. What was meant to be the best day of my life, the day of my wedding, turned into a nightmare, thanks to my own decisions and the betrayal of my family. I still don't know if I made the right choice, and I'm struggling to process everything that happened. Here's the complete story. 6 years ago, I thought I had met the love of my life. After dating for nearly 2 years, I was already planning to propose. She was 32 at the time, intelligent, stunning, and we seemed to share the same values. Everything seemed perfect until the day I stumbled upon some text messages on her phone. I wasn't snooping, she had asked me to check something while she was in the shower. That's when I saw the messages between her and my younger brother, who is 40. At first, I assumed it was just harmless family banter, but as I read on, my heart sank. The messages were unmistakable, they weren't just friendly. They were talking about meeting up and how much they missed each other. When she came out of the shower, I confronted her immediately. At first, she tried to gaslight me, insisting I was paranoid and imagining things. But when I showed her the messages, she broke down and started crying. She admitted she and my brother had been having an affair for months, right under my nose. I was devastated. The two people I trusted most in the world had betrayed me in the worst way possible. Not only had my girlfriend cheated, but she had done it with my own brother. I ended the relationship on the spot and told her to get out of my life. When I confronted my brother, he tried to justify it, claiming they couldn't help their feelings, because they had fallen in love. As if that somehow made it acceptable. I told him I never wanted to see him again, that as far as I was concerned, he was dead to me. I assumed my parents would be on my side, but I was wrong. Despite expressing disappointment in my brother, they kept urging me to forgive him. Their reasoning? He's your brother, and family is what matters most. To me, loyalty and trust are what matter most. And both my brother and my parents had shown they didn't understand that. I cut ties with all of them, even though it was one of the hardest things I've ever done. The next few years were focused on healing. Therapy helped me work through the trust issues this betrayal had left me with. I threw myself into my career and gradually rebuilt my life. Then, 2 years ago, I met the woman who would become my wife. She was different, kind, patient, and understanding in a way I'd never known. She knew about my past and my estranged family but never pressured me to reconcile. With her, I learned to trust again. When I proposed, it was the happiest moment of my life. As we planned our wedding, my family wasn't invited. I had made my peace with leaving them behind. I did, however, inform my parents about the wedding, not because I wanted them there, but to avoid any surprises later. I made it clear they were not welcome, especially not my brother. But of course, they showed up anyway, bringing my brother and his pregnant wife. My best man spotted them and told me just before the ceremony. I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. When I confronted my father on the phone, he dismissed my anger. "It's your wedding day. We're your family, we should be here," he said. He even tried to argue that enough time had passed and it was time to forgive and forget. I told them to leave, but my father refused, claiming they'd already arrived and didn't want to cause a scene. My wife, ever the rational one, suggested we let them stay for the ceremony to avoid ruining the day. Reluctantly, I agreed. But during the reception, as I watched them trying to blend in as if nothing had happened, years of suppressed anger bubbled to the surface. Fueled by champagne and rage, I gave an impromptu speech. I sarcastically thanked my brother for showing me the true meaning of betrayal, for teaching me that family doesn't always mean loyalty. I exposed everything, how he had slept with my ex, how my parents had defended him, and how their actions had led me to the woman I now call my wife. The silence in the room was deafening. My brother's wife looked horrified, my parents were stunned, and my brother couldn't even meet my gaze. My parents eventually left with my brother and his wife, my mother in tears and my father red-faced with anger or shame, I couldn't tell which. Though the reception continued, the atmosphere had shifted. Later, my wife pulled me aside, visibly upset. She asked if my outburst had been necessary. I apologized, admitting I couldn't let them get away with what they had done. She understood but reminded me that our wedding should have been about us, not my past. That night, I promised her, and myself, that I would face whatever consequences my actions brought. Little did I know the drama was far from over. A week after the wedding, I received an unexpected call from my brother's wife. Her voice trembling, she said, "I need to talk to you in person. There are things I need answers to, and I think you're the only one who can tell me the truth." Incredulous, I found myself scrambling to piece together what she could possibly want to discuss. Then, it hit me, the wedding, my speech, and the revelation about my brother's affair. As soon as the call ended, I hurried to find my wife. She was busy reviewing some files in our home office, but the moment she saw my face, she knew something was amiss. I explained the situation and mentioned that I'd consider it and get back to my brother's wife. Half expecting her to advise me to leave it alone, I was taken aback when my wife, as always, surprised me. "I think you should meet with her," she suggested thoughtfully after a brief pause. "Look, we can't change what's already happened, but your brother's wife, she's innocent in all of this. She's caught up in a mess she didn't create. Don't you think she deserves some clarity if you can give it to her?" Her words struck a chord. Deep down, I knew she was right. No matter how much I wanted to leave the past buried, I couldn't ignore the probability that my actions during the wedding had completely disrupted this woman's life. And, to make matters worse, she was pregnant. Surely the stress couldn't be good for her or the baby. With my wife agreeing to come along for support, I called my brother's wife and arranged a meeting for the next day at a quiet cafe. The sight of her as she entered made my heart sink. She looked utterly drained, her eyes red and swollen as though she'd been crying for days. She appeared to be in her third trimester, and as she came closer, it became evident that her pregnancy was even farther along than I had initially thought. Guilt hit me anew. Sliding into the seat across from us, she thanked me for meeting her. "I need to know everything, from the very beginning. When did it start? How long did it last? What exactly happened between your brother and your ex-girlfriend?" Taking a deep breath, I began recounting everything, the messages I'd found on my ex's phone, confronting both of them, their attempts to justify it by claiming they were in love, and how my parents had urged me to forgive them. I explained how I'd cut off all contact. I watched her face carefully as I spoke. She remained composed for the most part, though the anguish in her eyes and the slight tremble of her lip betrayed her emotions. When I finished, she sat silently for a long moment before asking softly, "Are you absolutely sure it was him?" "I'm sure," I said gently. "I'm sorry, but I'm certain." Her hand instinctively moved to rest on her belly as she nodded slowly. "He told me it was all a misunderstanding," she said, her voice wavering. "He claimed you were jealous of his relationship with your ex and made everything up." A surge of anger shot through me, though I wasn't surprised. He had lied to her, just as he always had. "I'm sorry," I repeated, struggling to find the right words. Shaking her head, she replied, "You're not to blame. I don't know what to do. The baby is due in a few weeks. How can I trust someone who could do this? How can I raise a child with him?" My wife leaned forward, speaking with quiet compassion. "I don't have any easy answers for you. But you're not alone in this. If you need help in any way, we're here for you." My brother's wife looked at her, surprise flickering across her face. "Why? You don't even know me." "Because it's the right thing to do," my wife answered simply. "And no matter what's happened between the adults, that baby is family." A surge of pride for my wife warmed my chest, and I nodded in agreement. She was absolutely right. Whatever my issues with my brother, his child, my niece or nephew, should not suffer for our mistakes. With tears in her eyes, my brother's wife said, "Thank you. I don't know what I'll do yet, but it helps to know I have support." As we parted ways, exchanging contact information and promises to stay in touch, she paused and gave me a searching look. "I understand why you did what you did at the wedding," she said. "I don't necessarily think it was right, but I appreciate knowing the truth. At least now I understand." On the way home, my wife finally broke the reflective silence. "Are you okay?" she asked gently. Letting out a sigh, I admitted, "I don't know. I feel terrible for hurting her, but I'm also relieved the truth is out." "Is that awful of me?" Shaking her head, my wife reassured me. "It's human. This whole situation is messy and complicated. There are no clear-cut answers." As usual, she was right. But even as we walked into the house, a heavy feeling lingered. This wasn't the end, far from it. What would she do with the truth? Would she leave my brother? And what would happen to their child? That night, as I lay awake in bed, the enormity of what I'd set into motion weighed on me. The truth was out, and there was no taking it back. As the days passed after my conversations with both my father and my wife, I found myself increasingly torn. Should I attend the family meeting and finally face my brother, or was it better to let sleeping dogs lie? Every time I thought I had made a decision, doubt crept back in, leaving me restless and agitated. 2 days before the proposed family meeting, my wife sat me down. "You're overthinking this," she said with a calm determination that I envied. "You don't need to have all the answers right now. Go into that room, speak your truth, and let the chips fall where they may. Whatever happens, we'll handle it together." Her words settled something in me. The truth had been buried for 6 years, and while unearthing it had caused turmoil, it had also brought clarity and a sense of justice. Maybe, just maybe, this meeting could be the first step toward true healing, or at least closure. The day of the meeting arrived, and I felt a knot of tension in my chest as we drove to my parents' house. My wife held my hand, her presence grounding me. When we arrived, the atmosphere was thick with unspoken words. My brother sat slumped in a chair, his expression a volatile mix of anger and resentment. My parents were unusually subdued, their faces lined with worry. As soon as I entered, my brother lashed out. "You've ruined my life," he yelled, his voice cracking with frustration. "You couldn't just let it go, could you?" I took a deep breath, keeping my voice steady. "No, I couldn't. Because what you did wasn't just a mistake, it was a betrayal. And you've spent 6 years lying to cover it up, hurting everyone around you in the process." For a moment, the room fell silent. My brother looked ready to retort, but my mother intervened. "Enough," she said quietly, her voice tinged with exhaustion. "We can't go on like this anymore. The truth is out, and we need to deal with it." What followed was an emotional and raw conversation that lasted for hours. My brother admitted to some of his wrongdoings but continued to deflect responsibility. My parents expressed regret for pressuring me to reconcile all those years ago, and I finally had the chance to release the pent-up hurt and anger I had carried for so long. By the end of the meeting, nothing was fully resolved, but something had shifted. The weight of 6 years of lies and suppressed emotions was finally acknowledged, even if the wounds would take time to heal. Final reflection. As we drove home, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. The meeting hadn't miraculously fixed everything, but it had brought a sense of closure I hadn't thought possible. My wife squeezed my hand as if sensing my thoughts. "You did what you needed to do," she said softly. "Now it's up to them to decide how they'll move forward." That night, as I lay in bed, my mind was calmer than it had been in years. I didn't know what the future held for my family or my brother's soon-to-be ex-wife and child, but I knew one thing for certain: I had finally done what was right, and for the first time in a long time, I could face myself without guilt or regret. Whatever came next, I was ready to face it, with my wife by my side and the truth as my guide. Closing message. Thank you for following along with my story. Life is messy, complicated, and rarely tied up with a neat little bow. But standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult, can lead to growth and healing, not just for yourself but for those around you. If you enjoyed this story or found something in it that resonated with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more real-life tales like this. Thank you for watching, and take care.